Dr. Cinema here again. So I know technically Star Trek month is over at the time I'm releasing this video, but I figured one more bonus episode couldn't hurt. Because I just finished watching the entirety of Star Trek The Next Generation. And I want to talk about the top 15 episodes. Star Trek Next Generation initially got some backlash from fans of the original series who wanted the return of their original favorite characters. But of course, Next Generation became a big hit and has grown a strong fan base. And I want to talk about what I believe to be the best 15 episodes. Now, of course, in addition to like a criteria of like importance, themes, character development, this is also just ultimately my personal picks. So, of course, you don't have to agree with the entirety of this list. Anyway, let's start. At number 15, we have Data's Day, Season 4, Episode 11. This really isn't a heavy episode in the sense that there's a big plot going on that affects the series. I mean, there's a Romulan spy, but that's not really why this episode is important. This focuses on the android known as Data, and we learn about him on more regular day-to-day basis, as well as how he feels about certain members of senior officers, such as Worf, Geordi, and of course, we see that Data is ultimately helping out with a wedding, which is kind of ironic because Data can't really feel emotions, but this is one of those episodes that shows that while he technically doesn't have emotions, you can sort of tell that he feels something to a certain extent. But we get inside the mind of Data, learn his feelings for other people, and just what kind of person he is. Not really a heavy episode, but it's still one that I think is really enjoyable. Now let's move on to next one, number 14, Skin of Evil, Season 1, Episode 22. The first season isn't the best of this show, but there is one episode that does stand out. So in the first season, the head of security is a woman known as Lieutenant Yar. And at the beginning of this episode, she gets killed off. This was due to some difficulties the actress and showrunner were having with each other on set throughout the first season. The first season, there was a lot of difficulty with a lot of the actors and the showrunner, but Lieutenant Yar was killed off in this episode. So this was a pretty big deal considering that she was seen as like a main character, one of the senior officers, along with Counselor Troi, First Officer Riker, and Captain Picard. So this was kind of shocking. Also, the antagonist in this episode is really very interesting. Known as Armus, he's apparently the sum of all evil that agent alien species managed to, in a sense, shed off of their bodies and souls, I guess. We don't really have a scientific explanation for this being, but he is very sadistic, and they managed to find a way to rescue one of their people that was captured by Armus and make sure no one ever tries to come back to this planet again. But it's the importance of Lieutenant Yar's death and a sort of funeral right at the end of people saying goodbye to her. And of course, the actress will come back in a couple of special episodes later on, but this was a nice done farewell considering the difficulty she was having on set. Well, I'll miss you, Lieutenant Yar. You're one of my favorites. Alright, now let's get on to number 13, Tapestry, Season 6, Episode 15. A best list of Star Trek TNG would be incomplete without some appearance from Q. Member of the Q Continuum, seemingly omnipotent. In this episode, it starts off with Picard, serious injuries, being put on a medical bed, and he seemingly is on his deathbed. And as he is apparently dead, Q comes to him, offers him a chance to change the moment in his life that is probably one of the biggest in his life, which is when he got into a bar fight shortly after graduating from Starfleet Academy, got stabbed through the chest, and his heart had to be replaced with a mechanical one. And we see him, he does go through trying to change that event, and it does have some consequences in a new future present for him. This is one of those episodes of any show where character gets a chance to change something, and what changes in his life is not what he wanted. It's one of those kinds of episodes, but this this one is raised higher than that because it's Q and it's Captain Picard, someone who's really disciplined and focused. And in his youth, he was pretty rebellious, and the fact that he wants to try to change his rebellious nature shows that his rebellious nature helped him become the legendary character he is today. And so for him to realize that it's a nice story to tell, and it's certainly one where Picard and Q are not at each other's throats. Well, Picard is. Q is just like, oh, why are you so mad? Whatever. Anyway, this is why I like this episode. And alright, so let's go to number 12 on this list. Sins of the Father, Season 3, Episode 17. Post Season 1, the head of security was Worf, the seemingly only Klingon in Starfleet. And his parents were killed when he was really young, and he was raised by humans. And apparently, he didn't really know much about his family as he thought. In this episode, we see that he has a long-lost younger brother named Kurn, and he's come to tell Worf that their father, who's been dead for quite some time, is now being accused of betraying the Klingon Empire by giving information to the Romulans. In this episode, it's a look inside the Klingon culture, both from a more mythical pop culture perspective, but also an actual in-narrative perspective of how the Klingon Empire works behind the scenes. And we learn why these accusations are being brought out now now after so many years. And Worf ends up taking the blame and shame that's of the accusations. And it's kind of like a sad note to end this episode on. And eventually this does get all cleared up later on in the show, but it is kind of a sad, little bit of a tragic note to end on for a Star Trek episode, which really sticks out for me. Alright, that's all I have to say for that one. Now let's go on to number 11, The Drumhead, Season 4, Episode 21. In this one, there was apparently something happened on the Enterprise, and they're trying to figure out who is the spy on the Enterprise. They bring in a woman who's been famous for doing this kind of work in the past, who's been retired. They bring her on board, and they seemingly find the spy, but of course she wants to dive further to see what other traitors could be on the Enterprise. And eventually it turns into this big McCarthy fiasco. And of course Picard, who questions this woman's judgment and her decisions, he ends up being put on trial as well. He has this nice speech about what this kind of paranoia can do to a culture and to a civilization, how we can't go down this path. He ends up making her have this huge outburst that completely discredits her and this entire proceeding. And we end on a note of Picard saying that we always have to be on watch for these kinds of people because they're not easy to spot. This is just a really nice. This is just a really nice message to have in a world where apparently we've supposed to have moved beyond like the violence and conflict of the past. And while this is, of course, a future where a lot of things are better, it still has its people who don't make the right choices, and events do happen where we have to actually consider the fact that we are to blame for everything that has happened in that particular situation. It's a very nice message for a Star Trek episode and one that I can really appreciate. Now let's go on to number 10 on the rank, The Pegasus, Season 7, Episode 12. For those of you who aren't familiar, throughout pretty much all of Star Trek history, we've had the Klingons and the Romulans who have the ability to cloak their ships, but Starfleet does not have that ability. And we learn why in this episode, and we learn a little bit about Riker's past back when he was an ensign, and the sort of shady thing that his first captain did, which ended in the ship being lost and a huge mutiny happening. This is sort of a look at the secret underdealings and corruptions that can happen even to an institution such as Starfleet, and the kind of consequences those kinds of experiments can have. So, now this does, of course, this episode has happened post the death of Gene Roddenberry, who really wasn't a big fan of having like interpersonal conflict between workers in the workplace because he thinks in the future that will be put behind us. But this reminds us that human beings are faulty by nature, so this kind of thing can still very much happen in a seemingly utopian-like future. Alright, let's go into rank number 9. Lower Decks, Season 7, Episode 15. Star Trek shows often focus on the top senior officers, the captain, commander. But in this one, we see like the ensign level of workers that happen to be on ships such as the Enterprise. We see what they go through on a regular basis, and in this particular episode, there is a little bit of a heavy thing that happens at the end for them that sort of brings the friends of the lower decks closer together. In this one, we also see that Worf actually has a pretty nice mentor-mentee relationship with one of the ensigns, who is the focus of this episode, and who feels the dark, tragic note that has happened at the end of the episode. It's a great way to show not only a little bit of humanity in Worf, but also just what is life like for these lower ranking officers on ships such as the Enterprise. And of course, this will serve the inspiration for an upcoming animated Star Trek show focused on the same concept and title. Alright, let's move on to rank number 8, Redemption. This is a two-part special that takes place during the Season 4 finale and the Season 5 premiere. Basically, the Klingon Empire is going into civil war. The truth about the fake shame that Worf had to take for the accusations against his father ends up getting cleared up, but it's mainly a civil war in the Klingon Empire for who gets to rule it and what is the future for the Empire going to look like moving forward. In this one, Worf ends up briefly leaving Starfleet in order to join his brother to help preserve the order that they're trying to maintain in their home world. This has action, some drama. It has everything you want from a two-part special such as this. It's very entertaining, and you can appreciate a lot about what this kind of two-part special has on the Klingon Empire moving forward. Alright, let's move on to rank number 7, The Defactor, Season 3, Episode 10. I don't think a lot of people are going to remember what episode this is. So basically, a middleman in the Romulan military ends up fleeing the Romulan Empire, defecting to the Federation in an attempt to stop what he believes a big assault is going to happen that the Romulans are going to carry out against the Federation. And while he does seemingly be willing to cooperate at the beginning, he still has problems like telling the Federation exactly what they need to know in order to prevent this, because he still has some doubt in him about defecting. And of course, he ends up moving past that, but the big twist at the end, again, it's sort of like that original Star Trek episode where this one kid ends up going back to this race of species who has no physical bodies, and he ends up saying that he does not want to go back, but he ends up going back anyway, and no one can really say anything to make the audience feel better about what happened. And that's sort of what happens to the Romulan defector at the end of this episode. Something happened to him that is kind of dark and really tragic that you end up really feeling for him, despite the fact that the Romulans and the Federation are in some sort of cold war with each other. But it's really one that makes you realize that this is sort of can be a sort of timeless theme. Alright, let's move on to rank number 6. Family, Season 4, Episode 2. This is the first episode after the 2-part special where Picard is turned into a Borg. Now, in this episode, Enterprise is orbiting around Earth and people are reuniting with some of their family members. For Wesley, he comes across a recording left by his late father, and he gets some closure by hearing this recording from his long dead dad that he never really met. For Worf, we see his human parents, and we see that although there are some things about his parents that kind of bug him and irritate him, he really does care for them and he really does love them, which is really nice to see. But this is where we see Picard, Jean-Luc reunite with his brother, who, like their father, is against Picard joining Starfleet when he could have chosen to stay back in France to tend to the vineyards. And we see some tension between Jean-Luc and his brother, but we also see just what kind of an emotional impact being turned into a Borg has had on him, and we see him sort of have a mini emotional breakdown. Now, Jean-Luc Picard has been portrayed as this great, heroic, knows exactly what to do kind of character, but in this one, he gets torn down a little bit, and he gets very human, and you connect with him, you have sympathy for him. You really start to care for him. This is where the fans can get closer to one of the best characters the franchise ever produced. Alright, let's move on to rank number 5. Season 5, Episode 23, I, Borg. The Enterprise comes across a crashed Borg scout ship that has one surviving crash survivor, an individual Borg that they end up deciding to heal back on their ship in confinement. And the initial idea is to return the Borg to the collective with a virus that can wipe out the entire species. Now, of course, while they heal the individual Borg, and as they communicate with this Borg, they really some things about the Borg that they haven't really previously known before, and this individual Borg, who ends up getting the name Hugh, ends up learning about how others view his species. And it's a very interesting concept, one that's not exactly unique per se, but it's one that's done very well in this episode, giving a sort of a species that's portrayed sort of like a zombie-like enemy, some humanity, something to connect to. And I just thought it was really well done. Alright, rank number 4, The Measure of a Man, Season 2, Episode 9. In this one, a scientist wants to study what's essentially the brain of Data in order to sort of like research further into the work of Dr. Soon, Data's creator. But since Data doesn't really have that much faith in this scientist's research, and since this is also one of the people that opposed his entering the Starfleet Academy so many years ago, he ends up declining. But of course, this gets into an argument about whether or not Data is an actual sentient entity or is he just property of Starfleet, which ends up which ends up becoming a trial where we have to debate whether or not Data is a person or is he just property. It's a sort of like a timeless theme about what happens when a self-aware robot becomes, okay, I just said it, self-aware, and how we should treat that kind of creature. And this one does that with one of the best characters of Star Trek, Data. And it's something that really makes you think, really makes you look at just how experiences with Enterprise has affected Data. And we get to learn how people have really connected to him while serving on the Enterprise, showing great interpersonal relationships. Alright, rank number 3. Q Who, Season 2, Episode 16. While this episode does have Q in it, obviously, this is the episode where we first meet the Borg. And they're portrayed as a terrifying, intimidating force. They're a collective species that is not interested in wealth, in politics, in power as the Federation knows it, just simply assimilating their technology and culture into theirs. They don't see them as actual species, but rather as raw material, which gives them a very terrifying appearance, and they just scare the shit out of the people, the Enterprise, in their first encounter, with Picard end up actually pretty much begging for Q to stop this from destroying them, which he does. And it ends on a note of, now that they know that the Federation exists, the Borg are coming after them. They're not interested in diplomacy. They want to assimilate. They want to take what they have. Again, they're just raw material to the Borg. This is a very iconic episode that ends up creating one of the best and well-known alien species in science fiction. Alright, let's go on to rank number 2. The Offspring, Season 3, Episode 16. Data creates a child. An android child for him to teach and raise. The idea in itself is pretty fun to watch, but as you watch him, Data really becomes invested in his child, which is something you expect. But ultimately, this is the episode where people are starting to realize that while Data has no emotions, you know he's feeling something to some sort of extent, because near the end of the episode where his child named Lal is end up approaching a shutdown, being forced to being terminated, and Data is trying all his best to try to save his child, but he's ultimately not successful, and it does impact him. And of course, while Data can't feel emotion, the reason why his child's malfunctions because she's starting to feel emotions, which she wasn't made to feel. And while Data does admit to his daughter in her final moments that he cannot literally love her, she says she has enough love for the both of them, which is a really touching moment that just has a lot of emotion and heart in this episode. All right. All right, the number one episode, the number one best episode of Star Trek The Next Generation is All Good Things, the series finale. Now, people are going to argue that between whether or not which show is the best one, the original or Next Generation. And each one is going to have their list of reasons why this, why that. But there's one thing the Next Generation will always have over the original show. It had an actual proper finale. You see, the original show only lasted for 3 seasons, and after the low ratings of season 2, they tried to change when the show's time slot, and it ended in some disputes between Gene Roddenberry and the studio. And ultimately, after the 3rd season, it was forced to go off the air. Now, of course, Gene Roddenberry did try to revive the series with an animated show continuing the adventures of the original Enterprise. And it got past the 1st season of 16 episodes. But as far as season 2, I don't even think they even had 5 episodes of season 2 before it was again forced to go off the air. And so this show, The Next Generation, had a finale that was planned out, that actually served as a proper goodbye. And the actual plot of it is, of course, finale material. Picard slipping back and forth between different places in time, a spatial anomaly that threatens the existence of humans, and of course a heavy presence from Q. But ultimately, this shows how connected we have come to this new crew of characters that at the beginning people didn't want to know. They wanted to get back with Spock and Kirk. But this shows that we have created a strong emotional attachment to these characters. We care about them. And it shows that this new show has brought some really great things to the table and will be well remembered after it's taken off the air. And yes, we have the movies that came out after the series finale, but for a lot of people, they probably don't need to know much after this series finale because that's how good it is. Anyway, that's all I really have for this bonus episode. Comment down below your favorite episodes. Like, subscribe, share. And Dr. Cinema, see you next time.